I've listened to a lot of the debate with regards to the government's company tax cuts from both sides of this House and the crossbench. Let's look at the speculated impact it may have on our country with regards to further investment and jobs. We have been told by the government that dropping the business tax rate to 25% will increase jobs and will create jobs and increase wages. But of course, tax is just one factor in creating jobs. The government wants us to follow suit with company tax cuts in America. Otherwise, they say we will miss out on investment. But are they also following suit on reducing energy costs that are crippling our industries, manufacturing and small businesses? The USA has reduced its company tax rate from 35% to 21%, not taking into account the added individual state company taxes that equate to a further 2 to 12%, depending on which state you are in, giving an average of 26% overall. A couple of months ago, I went to Ireland on a delegation and I asked the members of parliament there, "You actually have a 12.5% tax rate?" They said yes. And they said, for the multinationals, if you can get them to pay. You put out there that you're actually wanting to reduce it because the rest of the world is reducing their corporate tax rates. Well, to me, that is a race to the bottom, because you drop your corporate tax rates here when we can clearly not afford it. And what happens then is another country will reduce their rates to beat you. So how much is this going to go on? We can't afford it in this country. If we are comparing apples and apples, we cannot overlook an important fact, which is that the USA has some of the lowest energy costs in the world, and this is why they have and will always have a clear advantage over us, regardless of how much we reduce company tax. If we truly want foreign investment in Australia to create jobs, then we must target the real issue, which is energy costs. No one, not any other political party other than One Nation, is trying to stop the ever-increasing, out-of-control energy costs that are impacting on every home, business, manufacturing and industry in our country. In my talks with the government, I have been asking for tax reform in the area of natural gas and other hydrocarbons because, with the exception of one joint venture project, we are currently giving away our gas for free. The low return from petroleum resources owned by Australia is not a consequence of tax avoidance or tax evasion, but from a poorly designed tax system, a tax system introduced by Labor. Despite widespread acceptance for the need to get paid for gas taken from Commonwealth water, Labor has been mute on this important matter, and they actually spoke about it today on Senator Giorgio's bill. I guess it needs the huge donations from foreign-owned multinational petroleum companies more than it needs to pay down Australia's debt mountain and create new and better jobs. Natural gas and associated products are owned by Australians, and we need to be paid for them by way of taxes on those companies that profit from them. If we can get payment for our gas through tax reform, then we can invest billions of dollars in Australia and create more jobs and better jobs for generations. Government cannot create jobs, but it can remove impediments through tax policy, which is the reason I take such an interest in tax bills. In my mind, the government's tax cuts bills is about jobs, and jobs are the means by which Australians maintain their independence from government. All those people who wanted to be a fly on the wall in my negotiations with the government only need to know that jobs were uppermost in my mind during my discussions with government. But what future does our next generation have when both sides of this House have failed in their duty to encourage and support our ongoing investment in Australian tradesmen and women? For too long, the major parties have seen immigration as the way to meet our needs for skilled workers. The balance between creating skilled workers and importing the skills we need have been lost because the major parties have lost focus and purpose. Labor's record in relationship to jobs and those in work is a disgrace. It was Labor who withdrew employer incentives for a wide group of apprenticeships in 2012 and destroyed pathways for skilled jobs. But that was not enough destruction, because in the same year Labor caused the loss of 2,400 experienced TAFE teacher jobs, and TAFE enrolments fell by 50,000. Over 50 country towns with TAFE colleges suffered as a result of decisions made by Labor. It is Labor who argues that hundreds of thousands of foreign students with work rights don't take jobs from Australians in the 15 to 24-year age group. It is Labor that dudded Australian workers through enterprise bargaining agreements, or EBAs. These EBAs have seen hundreds of thousands of workers get lower hourly rates than similar but non-unionised workers. Penny Vickers stacked shelves at night at Coles when she challenged the 2011 enterprise bargaining agreement with the Shop Distributors and Allied Employees Association. She challenged the deal made between her union and Coles because she was worse off under the union-negotiated agreement. In February this year, Coles offered 77,000 low-paid workers a new deal because of Penny Vickers, not because of her union. It was Labor that opposed One Nation's amendment, which would have seen penalty rates restored to those who had lost them under unfair EBAs. Labor says one thing but does another, and in my mind that makes them untrustworthy. Labor wants to use tax policy to promote class warfare in this country. I will never support tax policy that promotes class warfare. I want everyone to have a chance in life to learn and to work. For too long we have seen the decline of apprentices, regardless of what trade. TAFE colleges across the country have shut. Employers fear for the ability to pay wages for a trainee over a period of years, when they may find themselves at times unable to draw a wage. Under my proposed apprenticeship pilot scheme program, I want to give 1,000 Aussies an opportunity to a trade and a future. Under the proposal, the government will pay to the employer 75% of the first year's wage, 50% of the second and 25% of the third. In this way, the government does partner the education and training, as they do for anyone who may attend other educational schemes, including university. The program is intended to give those Aussies who live in rural and remote areas the first bite of the cherry in taking up apprenticeships on offer. It is important that we address the high youth unemployment outside of the cities and give encouragement to the youth to stay in their towns with their families rather than moving to the cities looking for work. The proposed and partially legislated tax cuts for companies have next to no support in the Australian community. Of course, sales are not profits because expenses like the costs of goods sold, wages, energy costs, interest on borrowing, etc., need to be deducted before profits can be calculated and tax liability determined. One Nation supported the tax rate cuts for businesses with sales up to $50 million turnover, despite knowing that any threshold for the tax cuts would encourage businesses to restructure. It's common knowledge the government wants the 25% tax rate to apply to all business. The government's case for tax rate cuts for all business is weak. Nothing the government has said has changed my mind. So what has happened to get my support for the tax rate cuts for businesses with sales above $50 million? The government has rightly been criticised for the failure to make these tax rate cuts part of a package of wider tax reform. When the government came knocking at One Nation's door looking for support for removing the $50 million sales threshold for tax cuts, I decided to take the opportunity to start tax reform in relationship to Commonwealth-owned natural gas. It is well known that there has been huge investment by foreign-owned multinationals in gas located in the 2,400-kilometre northwest shelf geological formation which lies off the coast of Western Australia. Less well known is that Australia will receive through the taxation system next to nothing for our natural gas, while foreign-owned multinationals will make billions from the sales of this gas each year. This government and Labor shake with fear at the prospect of foreign-owned petroleum multinationals campaigning against their candidates at the next election if they take steps to reform the tax system applicable to gas and other hydrocarbons. Both major parties are unwilling to develop a bipartisan plan to get foreign-owned multinationals, gas companies to pay for our gas so that we can all benefit in the way Norway and other countries have done. One Nation last year announced its policy to place a royalty on gas in Commonwealth waters, to revoke long-held licences that could go into production but are not being used, and to get gas reserved for Australia at a low price so that electricity and gas prices would fall dramatically. One Nation is shocked that Japan government makes nearly $3 billion a year by placing an import duty on our gas, and we get a few $100 million. I have sought to get the government to reform the tax system in relationship to Commonwealth-owned gas in return for support for tax cuts, but the government has rejected placing a royalty on gas taken from the Commonwealth, and it has rejected a serious overhaul of the petroleum resource rent tax system, which has created a wall of unearned tax credits that see these companies unable to ensure they never will make on profit on which tax is payable. Nevertheless, some changes have been negotiated which will see limited reform of the PRRT system, and some of these changes have been leaked to the press already by the government. And if there are any changes to the PRRT and the reduction, it's because of One Nation, our push from the government. And if they actually open up these retention leases, and which they have been held by some companies for over 30 years and never utilised, it's because of One Nation. Because we put pressure on both the National Party and the government to actually start doing something about it, so we get royalties and we get more money flowing into this country. I will not support this, and I'm getting criticised for it, but as more as it comes out and the public are aware of what cost it's going to be to this country and for future generations, a lot more people are now saying no, they don't want these corporate tax cuts. My negotiations with the government also has been that the Banking Royal Commission must be paid for by the banks, and there must be a compensation fund paid to people who have lost their properties and the devastation they have faced because of the banks. There are many areas that we need to clean up, and I will go on and on about this until it is done, until the government realises that we are losing so much money from our resources in this country to multinationals to come out here and rip it off. Of the revenue that we have, 75% is paid by the PAYE taxpayer. Those people who have to pay their taxes, they don't get the deductions, and they hand over their money. But corporations and other multinationals in this country, those ones that do pay their taxes, write down everything they possibly can. And we need to actually have a thorough look at our taxation department. They are overworked, and they are reluctant, and they can't go after a lot of the people that they need to. The multinationals in this country, as I've said, revenue-based, 75% from the PAYE taxpayer. 25% comes from corporate tax, and of that corporate tax, 98% is paid by Australian companies and only 2% by multinationals. This has been my argument in this place since I was in the other place in 1996, 97, 98, was about the multinationals paying their share of tax in this country. You're in fear that we're going to lose our sovereignty. No, they come out here because it's a good deal, because we have a safe place, we have the resources, and they can get on and get the job done, not like in a lot of these countries that's faced with terrorism. They come here because they know it's the best place. And yet we've done free trade agreements that allows them to bring in their own workers, and here we have multinational companies that are employing staff from overseas in call centres, and we're using their pay as a tax deduction here in Australia. It's disgraceful. And you talk about wanting jobs for Australians? I don't see it. I don't see it from either the Labor Party, and I don't see it from the Coalition. We have got the best country in the world to actually prosper like we did in the 60s and 70s and 50s after the war. But we are sliding into this quagmire, this swamp, because you're reluctant to do anything, because you're in fear that you're going to lose the multinationals. What are you losing? Absolutely nothing, because you know what? They don't pay their tax here. Where are you going to find the money? Our ever-increasing welfare bill is up now to $187 billion, and it's growing. You've got that many migrants coming in the country that we can't afford the infrastructure or the nursing homes or the hospitals or the schools. and yet you want to still throw out and give these tax cuts. I want to see Australian companies get their tax cuts. They need relief by all means, but do it in a well-managed way, and don't do it so that we're going to hand on a hell of a debt, a bill to future generations that we'll never be able to pay back. And then what will happen is you're going to have people like the countries like China coming and asking for the money and end up with our resources, our ports, our airfields, our resources, our natural land, as they have done in Sri Lanka and in Greece. And I think it's not going to happen. It will happen because of bad management, poor government and lack of decent opposition in this parliament, because you'll only get good government if you've got good opposition, and the Labor Party's not it.